I'm Bobby McGee. I'm founder and director of Christ's Home Ministries. We're a 501c ministry based out of the mountains of North Carolina and are primarily a prison ministry. We go into prisons across this country, and I share with men and women. For the last 10 years I've been sharing about where I came from and my testimony, but I seldom do a free world church, and so many of you guys have asked me to do a testimony. So I want to kind of tell you what I tell the men and women on the inside and where I came from, not to bring any glory to my past, but to kind of give you an idea of where I came from so that you'll see what the Lord has delivered me from. With that, I was raised in a dysfunctional family. My father was a World War II vet and a Korean War vet and was a medic in both wars. And so he treated a lot of wounded, and he evacuated a lot of dead bodies. This is actually being recorded on D-Day, and my father was on a barge that landed on Normandy Beach, and he came out as a medic with a job to try to help the people that were wounded and to evacuate bodies and body pieces back to the barge. And this was post-traumatic stress days, before it was attributed to our military. And my dad drank that hole in his chest. He tried to drink it full. I can remember as a boy, my daddy was good-natured, would start drinking, and it was eerie because being my dad's only son, there was times when my dad wanted to take me riding, and I can still remember his voice. Come on, boy, let's go riding. Me and my daddy'd ride the dirt roads up there in the mountains, North Carolina, on the Tennessee-North Carolina line. And my daddy drank, and he'd start singing gospel music. And that's where I learned Old Rugged Cross at. And that's where I learned the song, Old Song in the Garden at. So it was amazing that this man who was under the influence of alcohol, running from the memories and the atrocities of war, in that midst of that drunken state, would sing about the old rugged cross and about walking in the garden with Jesus. And I remember an old song, Love Lifted Me, that I was sinking deep in sin, far from the peaceful shore. And my father was in the Navy, and he saw a lot of men sinking in those waters, never to rise again. And my daddy wrestled with his own demons for a lot of years, and it came out in his behavior. My mother was a victim of spousal abuse, where my father would take out his anger and oftentimes his pain out on my mother. And as kids, we had to witness this. I had 2 older sisters and 1 younger. When my older sisters tried to start intervening, they wore my daddy's bruises, as well as other emotional scars and physical scars. By the time I was 8, my daddy was riding me around in these cars drinking. I idolized my father. I loved him. He'd pass out on the side of those mountains, because it always came to a place with my dad when we would have those rides. And he would tell me about the war. And he'd start off telling me about the bar rooms he'd went in and some of the fights that they had been in the bar rooms and these drunken brawls. But then he'd end up telling me about the men that he treated. And he would go to a stage where he'd start crying. And I'll never forget it. And I wouldn't even understand what he was crying about. And a Corvair is a small car. My dad would get in the back seat and pass out. And there was often times I'd smell urine. And he was an alcoholic. And I can't tell you the VA hospitals he'd been to trying to find some peace for his own soul. And I don't condone my dad's behavior, but I understand more of the abuse issues that I suffered from my father, and as well as the rest of my family suffered from my father. I've got a glimpse of some of the pain and some of the nightmares that he suffered from. It doesn't excuse his behavior, but it gave me a glimpse into something deeper than myself, and it allowed me to forgive my father for some of the atrocities that he showed me and my family. With that said, my mother left the mountains with her kids, took all 4 of us down to Charlotte, North Carolina, a single mom with 4 kids. In 1968, I was 10. It wasn't a say no to drug generation. The older people around me had already gravitated to drugs. And so by the time I'm 11, 12 years old, I'm already drinking, smoking pot. I'm doing my first time I got locked up, I was 13 for running away from home. 14 years old, I got my first prison sentence. My last name's McGee. I was the 16th person at this youth camp, and so my number was M16. That was my first prison number at 14. I was released right after my 16th birthday. While I was still 16, I got my first North Carolina number as a committed youthful offender and got a new prison number, 110580S, which led to my 18th birthday. I went to another prison from when I turned 18 to another level, which is 18 to 21 years old. And right before my 21st birthday, I was released. While I was still 21, I got my first Virginia sentence, a new number, 131193, which violated my North Carolina parole. So I had to come from the state of Virginia on parole back to the prison in North Carolina, finish my sentence there, and then I got out. Wasn't out 2 years and had a brand new Virginia number, 156125. Ended up with another North Carolina number, 0269204. The answer for people like me is this: habitual felon indictments, life sentences. Throw them in a cage, lock them up, does not change. The counselors in the drug rehabs told me that I was one of the ones that couldn't succeed, that I'd went too far in this thing. My marriage counselors that counseled me and my wife in our marriage said that the very best I could hope for was a dysfunctional marriage because of the modeled behavior that I had as what my father modeled to me with my mother, that I'd never have a healthy relationship. I just spent my 22nd wedding anniversary with my wife. My point is, God had some other things in store for my life. I just didn't know it then. I realize today that if it wouldn't have been for the 22 years I did on the inside, I'd be a dead man. I wouldn't be talking to you today. God used the prisons to keep me alive for such a time as this. So I want to tell you about one of the last prison sentences that I was on. I turned 30 in prison, and there's a lot of people in prison that keep making the choice to go back, and believe me, they're tired of it. They just don't know how to trust anything. So many people told me, just trust Jesus. I didn't know how to trust anything. How do you trust anything when the very people that God put in your life to love you and nurture you abuse you? So trust in Jesus isn't the issue, it's trust in anything. I needed something deeper than that kind of advice. I needed something deeper than just pray about it, it'll be okay. I needed something deeper than that. I needed to know how to pray. I didn't know what prayer meant. So many things I took for granted because so many years of my life I spun my wheels and lived inside a box. Told I couldn't change. After the second habitual felon indictment, I got to believe in it. I was tired of it. So I said to myself, I'm going to figure this out. I got my GED. I decided to take psychology classes and sociology classes from prison college courses, and kept a straight A average of my psychology because I was trying to figure out, I wanted a better life. I was tired. Listen, when you wake up one day and you realize that you've ate more prison food in your life than you have free world food, that's a day of reckoning. I don't care who you are. I got tired of being who I was, but I didn't know how to change. So I kept doing the same thing time and time again. I figured if I studied hard enough, I could figure this out. It was obvious to me that I had some emotional scars because of what I had been through as a child. So I decided to address some of those issues. I started getting real with some things and being honest with myself. I learned some terms like conditional response and behavior modification and molding and shaping, and learned about Pavlov's dogs and why I was responding certain ways to certain given stimuli, and I learned about all these red flag warnings from the 12-step programs. My point is, I had the tools. And I had planned my last year, I stayed clean in prison. I made interstate compact, which means you can go from one state to the next. because I was in Virginia doing time. I wanted to go back to the mountains of North Carolina. I wanted to get away from Charlotte, get away from the games, get away from the bar rooms, get away from the motorcycle clubs, the drugs. I wanted my life back. I had a chance again. I had a job, a place to stay, had good things going to me. I wanted to be a substance abuse counselor. Within a week, I was in the bar room doing the very thing I swore I wasn't going to do again. Within 9 months, I was in the local jail with a $125,000 bond for an armed robbery charge, where I'd started shooting cocaine on a Friday night, and I'd spent all my money, sold everything I could sell, took all the drugs I could take without getting killed, and I went and robbed a store for $86 and some change, and bought a little bag of cocaine powder with it, and that's what I gave for my freedom. And that was after knowing better and learning better. See, I had an enemy against me that was trying to hold me down. I didn't realize it. I thought the enemy was drugs. I thought the enemy was the law. I thought you were the enemy. I didn't understand that I had an enemy trying to hold me down all my life. They offered me a plea agreement in the midst of this madness and told me that if I would plead guilty to a lesser charge of common law robbery, that they wouldn't seek the habitual felon indictment and wouldn't give me any more than a 10-year sentence. Well, 10 years sounds like a lot of time, but I could have got life. And so when they said 10 years, I said, that sounds like a good deal to me. I could do the 10 years. I just couldn't do life behind it. And so I went for the deal. Well, they lowered my bond from $125,000 to $10,000, and I was able to make bond. When I came out of jail, they had scheduled my court case for the second week of January. I had every intention, this was right before Thanksgiving, I had every intention of working through Thanksgiving, working through Christmas with the family I had left, go through New Year's, a couple of days before my court case, run. I couldn't believe they'd let me out of jail. I knew I was going back to prison. I'd ran all my life. I'd ran from the law. I'd ran from my pain. I ran from God, from that hole right there in my chest that I couldn't fill up with cocaine and drugs. And it was in my nature to run. Well, there's a little church in a town called Candler, North Carolina. And the name of the church is Good News Baptist Church, and it sits up on a hill. The sign is right by the road, and this particular night, the sign, I looked up and it said, live nativity scene. I didn't know what a nativity scene was. You see, our family, Christmas time is when my dad got drunk. Thanksgiving is when my dad got drunk. Weekends is when my dad got drunk. I didn't believe a virgin had a child. I didn't believe the dead could walk from the grave. I couldn't conceive this thing to be the truth, so I didn't believe. I cursed God. I put a tattoo on my arm. You can see it. It says IDC. And I tattooed that on there for I don't care, because I'd given up hope. I was getting ready to run from the law again, and I figured when they caught me this time, I had a pistol, and I figured I was going to have a shootout. They call it suicide by blue today. I didn't want to go back to prison. I had nothing left to live for. I pulled into this church lot at a live nativity scene and was approached by 3 precious people. And the pastor, who I didn't know was a pastor at the time, said something to me like this. The Bible says, for all have sinned and fallen short of the glory of God. To me, it sounded like he was calling me a sinner, and that made me mad. You see, I'm trying to see a nativity scene. I ain't trying to get preached to in this parking lot. It made me mad. I told him I ain't trying to hear it, and I left. I got 20 to 30 minutes away, and I felt something call me back to that church. I'm a man that's been through a whole lot. I just told you where I was raised. They called me state raised. I've been through some of the hardest of the drugs. I'm going to tell you, nothing has ever affected me like it did when I heard the Lord call me to turn the car around. I went back to the church, and it had been a good 45 minutes now since I had left. And when I pulled in and my headlights aimed to the top of the church, the top of that drive, the same three people that I'd laughed at were standing there to meet my car. And here's what they told me. Bobby, we knew you were coming back. We've been praying for you. The Bible says that the effectual and fervent prayer of the righteous avail much. And that didn't hit me till later. Not only did they pray for me, but they stood on the top of that hill, looking at the bottom of that drive, and expectancy, waiting for my car to come back. You see, that was a prayer of faith. I've always said that prayer had legs, because they didn't go around, they didn't go back to their costumes. They didn't go back to nativity. They stood on the top of that hill praying for a lost sinner. And I came back to the church, and I went back in the pastor's study, and he showed me about a songwriter in the Bible. I've always been a songwriter. He said his name was David. And he took me and showed me some of the Psalms. And he showed me where David, the Bible said, was a man after God's own heart. And he showed me where David was a mighty warrior. He wasn't soft as cotton. He showed me where David sinned with Bathsheba. I didn't know that somebody was after God's own heart could commit sin. And so it started making me look at this thing a little different. Then I heard about an old hard-headed fisherman named Peter that the Bible said walked with the very Son of God for 3 years. And then I heard about a tax collector named Matthew that his own people hated him because he was robbing them. And the very Son of God walked by and says, follow me. I didn't know that he walked with those kind of people. I thought that Jesus, Son of God, he's going to have all the bling and the robes and the staffs and all that. But in fact, the people that had all that were talking about Jesus, said, look at your Jesus down there messing with all the prostitutes and alcoholics of the time. And the very Son of God said, that's who I came for. It's the sick that need a doctor. I didn't know what I was, but I knew I was sick. I tried to change and I couldn't. And I got this message, y'all, that I didn't have to understand all this. See, I still don't understand how a virgin had a child. I still don't understand how the dead walks from the grave. I can't understand how God made a new heart in here, but he did. I can't understand how God gave me a life, but he has. I've been out of prison a lot of years, and he's made me director of a ministry. I didn't know I was going to be a gospel songwriter. I thought I was going to die in prison or from a drug overdose. My point is this, that if we'll quit thinking and trying to believe with this and start believing with this, the word doesn't say we believe in our minds. The word says this, if you believe in your heart that Jesus is who he said he was, if you believe in your heart that you're a sinner, I knew in my heart what I was. I just didn't know what to attach it to. And I knew in my heart that something bigger had called me back. I just didn't really know what his name was. And I knew in my heart that something had me there that was all powerful. And it was affecting my very body and my emotions. My daddy had always told me, boy, you want something to cry about? I'll give you something to cry about. I had these big fat tears rolling down my cheeks. That wasn't in my nature. I was raised in prison. God was changing my life on the spot. And I called upon his name. And I said, Lord, I don't understand all this. You want to hear my sinner's prayer? Lord, I don't understand all this. And I still don't. But I know in my heart I'm a sinner. And I believe in my heart that you're real. I can feel it. And my mind was telling me, come on, Bobby, what are you going for? In my heart, I knew I was hearing the truth, just like you know you're hearing it. And so I listened to that voice. And I said, Lord, would you please forgive me? And would you please, if you can you make me different from the person I am? I'm tired of being who I am. And it changed my life. Now, I went back to prison because I didn't go on the run. I went back to prison for almost 8 more years, but I went back saved. I was released from the Virginia system in 95, married my wife soon after, and in 97 we went back into our first prison. In 2000 I released my first gospel CD. 4 gospel CDs later in prisons nationwide. Listen, I thought being a Christian was going to be boring. There's never been a more fulfilling life than the one I'm living now. If you're still locked up, listen to the voice from an incarcerated brother. There's a better life. This ain't a fable. This ain't a fairy tale. This thing will set you free. I promise if you'll put your faith and your trust not in a man, but in the Son of God, he'll change your life. He did mine. With that, we've got a lot of prisons. We're presently on the road. We've got about a year's worth of ministry to do. Sitting on a front porch in one of our host families' houses outside of Richmond, Virginia, where we're doing prisons. And I've been so blessed and favored to have people placed in my life that honor God and that love on me unconditionally. I thank you for your time today, and I hope that this has brought some insight. Again, if you're incarcerated, look for us on your calendars. We're trying to get to every prison in the country. So look for us. Be aware of us. Christ Song Ministry is our names. I'm Bobby McGee. You can find us at christsongministry.org. Love you guys. Peace out.